Charlene Jorgensen and welcome to Quilting from the Heartland. Today I'm going to show you how to make the diamond double wedding ring. In the past we've done many variations of the double wedding ring, which has a lot of pieces in the arc. In this program I'm going to use just the background piece of the double wedding ring, and then I'm going to use the add-on template to the double wedding ring to make the rest of the design. We've had a lot of fun experimenting with this pattern because there are so many color choices that you can pick from. You can be very conservative and just use 3 color combinations like I did in the first one. This one has just 3 shades of blue. You'll see it has a light, medium, and a dark blue. The one thing that will be in common with all of the designs is that I will always use the same fabric in this part of the design as I use in the background part. When I hold the templates on top of the design, it will be easier for you to see where the background piece of the double wedding ring fits there, and then the add-on template, which a lot of you are familiar with, will be used in this area. The second quilt that I'm showing you has 4 fabrics used in the design. In this one, the 2 ends of the melon have the vibrant colors, and then I used a softer color in here, but again using the same color in this part of the melon as I did in the background. It really shows off a unique design in this area. In fact, a lot of people think that it's an impossible thing to make because they don't realize that we've used fast and easy cutting techniques to make that part of the design. The next one that I'm showing you has 4 fabrics in the design. We start out with the 2 points having the brightest fabrics, and then we've added a second, third, and fourth fabric in here. So you do have a lot of fabric choices to work with when making this design. The one on the back wall, which is the brightest of all, has 4 fabrics in it. And when you look closely at it, again you'll see that it is the bright fabrics that are used at the points of the melon. Again, I did like in the rest of them though, I used the same fabric for the center diamond as I did in the background. One thing that makes this quilt different from all the rest, to go with the bright colors, we've quilted it with a metallic sulky thread. And I think in that quilt it really needed that to add to the bright colors. Now I'm going to show you how I cut the quilt and what makes the design so fast and easy to make. Before I start cutting though, I want to show you the process that I went through in choosing the fabrics that go into this design. Remember in the one on the wall how I used the bright on both ends? This was my first melon that I made, and notice that this one isn't as bright as the second, and then the third one, which is the one I settled on, notice the color change and how much better this one looks than the first one. So just because you've cut the pieces, don't feel like you have to always use them. When preparing the fabric, make sure that you wash them all with a fabric soap that doesn't have any bleaching additives, and then I dry all my fabric in the dryer. So all the shrinking and bleeding has been done before I start making the quilt. I have already placed 3 of the fabrics on top of each other, and I will straighten one edge at the same time because we don't want to waste time in cutting the strips. There are 3 color combinations in this quilt, and I'll show you how those strips are used in the design. I'll move this ahead so it's easier to see. I have folded the fabrics on top of each other, and the folded edge is in the same place on all 3, and the selvage is on the end down here, and notice that I will have to straighten it or take quite a chunk off to straighten them all. The first cut I make, I will always go backwards and then forwards. All of the fabrics have been folded up on top of the board, so when I turn it now, I won't disturb the fabric after it has been straightened. Now the strips are cut 2.5 inches wide. And when I lay this up here, I'll make sure that it is 2.5. No, it's 2.25, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure that I had it right. So cut your strips 2.25 inches wide. And I will be cutting strips from all of them at the same time. There are your 3 different colors used in the design, and you would do the same with the black fabric or the background fabric. You would cut strips the same width from that. Then you would sew those strips together into 3 color combinations, and look at when I lift this first one up, notice how we have staggered the fabric 1 to 1.25 inches from each other, and those are cut at a 45-degree angle. There's your second color combination with just the purple on both sides, and the third one starts out with the black, then the purple, and then the magenta. And now I will show you how to cut that on the 45. What you do to cut this on the 45 is to find the 45-degree angle mark on your ruler and match that line up with one of the seam lines on the sewn strips. And I've lost my cutter, I guess. Making sure that it's straight all the way across, and cut this end off. And then turn it around. And when you look up at the flannel board, you'll see the 3 color combinations up on here. See how I cut them on the 45 like this? And these are 2-inch strips that are cut for this part of the design. And again, I am going to line up, if I turn the ruler this way, the 45-degree angle is here, and the 2-inch line is on the cut edge of the fabric. And that's how these pieces are cut. Repeat that process by cutting 2-inch strips on the 45-degree angle from each color combination. But before you cut all the pieces, make sure that you have your color combinations laid out correctly and that you have the right angle on your pieces. The first one would be with the green on the bottom, the second one laying in here with the purple on both sides, and then to repeat or to complete the diamond 9 patch, you would have the magenta on the other side. One thing I forgot to mention earlier was that when you look on the back side of all of the combinations of strips, I have pressed all of the seams open. And when you press the seams open, finger press them first, scratching those seam lines open with your pointer finger before you press with the iron. Before, when I have taught this class, I have taught you to press this seam allowance this direction and this one in this direction, alternating the pressing. But I find with this new method that it's much easier and much flatter in the final end of the quilt. Now when you move up to the flannel board, you will see the 3 strips cut on the 45-degree angle. Each of these are cut 2 inches wide. Then these are sewn together, and I will do that at the sewing machine. But before I go there, I want to show you how to cut the melon from the 9 patch. When doing this, I like to work on a smaller mat board. Well, I guess I can't find it, so I'll work on this board. And I will work with the melon on top of the 9 patch. Notice that I have scored the melon in 2 directions, halfway in this direction from point to point, and then I found the halfway mark here, so I have a horizontal and a vertical score line on my template. I match those points or those lines on the template with the seam line on the 9 patch, matching this point, and these 2 points here. That way everything will be equal throughout the whole melon. Again, making that first cut going backwards and then forward. Now you can only cut one of these out at a time. My reason for saying that I wanted the small mat board was you don't have to turn such a big surface to make these. Now if you were to try to cut many of these at one time, you would have a difficult time matching all of these points or stacking them on top of each other. That is how we cut the melon that goes into the diamond double wedding ring. Well, I think, one other thing that we need to do is show you how to cut the background piece which goes into the design. In this particular one, we're working with the darkest fabric in the background, and before I do that I fold it in half, matching the selvage edges, and in half again. The second fold, the fold comes just up to the selvage edge. I will fold the rest of the fabric up on top of the board and then place the background template for the double wedding ring up on top of the folded fabric. So each time I cut one of these, I will get 4 of them at one time. As I work my way along the curves, I have slightly tilted the cutter. I recommend using a small cutter rather than a large one because the blade on the large cutter does not want to follow the curve as good. And then when you're done, make sure you close the cutter so somebody doesn't come along and get cut. That's how easy it is to cut the background pieces for this design. Well, now I think we are ready to go to the sewing machine and show you how to put the pieces together. I will be sewing with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and also I will be using a cotton thread, and I will use a bright thread so you can see what I am doing in the sewing process. The first thing I'm going to do is line up all of the cut combinations like this, looking at the back side, see how all of the seams have been pressed open. Now to match those, I'm going to use silk pins, and I will insert the pin right on the seam line, 1/4 of an inch from each edge. The point that I insert the pin is the point that I will have to sew over, and that's how you get the perfect intersections. Now, I don't always recommend sewing over pins, but in this design, for this part, it is necessary, so I will have to slow down for that part. Notice how, again, I inserted it right on the seam line through the top and the bottom, 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Now where the pin goes in is important, not where it comes out again. When I start sewing in the crevice right here, and I will not do any back stitching. And I like to start sewing on an anchor cloth. I will guide the fabric to the sewing machine with the stiletto, starting right in the crevice, checking on the bottom to make sure that nothing's out of line, and sew directly over that point that I inserted the pin. And the last part of the seam, notice how it ends up again right in the crevice. And we'll sew off onto the anchor cloth. Then the next thing is to finger press the seam open. And it'll lay really nice and flat. And see how we got those perfect points on the right side. After you finger press them, then it's a good idea to always press all of the pieces. And I like to use a good amount of steam. Now if you've pre-washed your fabric, it's okay to use steam in the quilting process. If you haven't pre-washed it, when you use steam, it will shrink more one way than another, and it will be very difficult to work with. Now the next part would be just repetitious. I would again add this seam to this one, and I would stab the pin on the seam line and sew it, but I will go on to the next part because I've already shown you how to cut out the melons. Now when attaching the melon to the background, this is how you would start. Notice when I place these two pieces up to each other, they don't want to fit until I overlap them. That's because the seam allowance is included in the pieces. You first have to identify the center on all four sides of the background piece, and on this one we have cut a notch on all four sides, and then you would fold it again this way and you would cut another notch here. Then you would do the same with this one. You fold this piece in half, and I'll cut a tiny little notch here, and I'll cut a tiny little notch here. Now I have identified the center on both parts, so I know how to connect it together. Now when putting these together, it's quite a curve that we have to work with. And I find it much easier to work with the smile on top. I often refer to it as the concave. Then insert a pin to hold those two in place. Now to match up the end point, insert a pin 1/4 of an inch or equal distance from all three sides of the tail of the background. Now on the melon part, a mistake that you might make would be to measure 1/4 of an inch from the point in. Instead, you are supposed to measure 1/4 of an inch from the edge in, because the distance from the point to the 1/4 inch mark is a lot greater than if you go from the edge. So insert it on the 1/4 inch point from the edge of both sides and hold it with a pin. Then move these into a match, and notice how I'm not clipping anything at all. We'll do this, and then we'll go down here and we'll insert another pin 1/4 of an inch from all three edges, and from there to there. And now we will sew that seam backing up to that point where the 1/4 inch comes from the edge. Go just to the pin and then continue ahead. Now I'm not going to use a lot of pins in this part of the design because I can do the rest of the pinning with my stiletto as I sew along the edge. And just continue sewing along until you have the background attached. After this is attached, when you've done one, the rest of the design is the same because you just keep adding more melons as you work your way around. When looking at the second one, notice how I have backed in to the corner here and then continued to the other end. And when you make this design, the more melons that you put in a row will determine how wide your quilt is, and the more rows you put together will determine the length of it. But always sewing with the smile on top of the melons when you're putting it together. When you connect the 2 rows, you want to make sure that you always have the right color combinations together. So it's a good idea to lay it out on a bed sheet or a large flannel board or something so that you don't lose track of your design. At the end of the program today, Linda is going to show us some machine quilting techniques which will finish off this design using a sulky metallic thread. I sure hope you've enjoyed this part of the program as much as I have enjoyed preparing it for you.